hop in. I'm sure they'll get the gist of it anyway. But yeah, no, thank you to everyone that's come along for this tech session. As you well know, it's essentially on how to sort of make the transition from manual testing into automation. So obviously, as you can probably tell, we've got Beth Marshall, who's a senior test engineer at Smoothwall. So this is predominantly just about a bit to do with her journey, the sort of myths and things she came across whilst trying to get into automation, why she did it, and sort of where to start as well. And then David Vardy, so he's a senior test engineer at Ordnance Survey, but he worked with Beth Marshall before that, and obviously how these two guys know each other. But yeah, so with questions, so everything I'm sure there's going to be a lot of questions that people are going to want to ask as we go on. Feel free to use the chat button at the bottom, direct it to everyone or to specific people, whether it's David, so he can chip in as we go along. But there is going to be about 15 to 20 minutes at the end for all the questions that people might have. If we don't get through all the questions because we're running over for whatever reason, we'll be sure to send out a bit of sort of like an email with everything attached after. So yeah, if no one has any questions, we'll get started. I'll pass you over to Beth and David to introduce themselves and then obviously crack on. So yeah, Beth, do you want to?
Okay, so let me go ahead and share my screen. Okay, can you guys see that?
Yeah, that's perfect.
Okay, cool. So yes, as I'm saying, my name's Beth. I am currently a senior test lead at Smoothwall, which is where I met David. He was head of QA there. I wanted to do this talk really, it's a repeat of a talk that we did back in November in Leeds, but I really wanted to do this talk again because there was a lot of interest, and I think there's a lot of people in the position that I've been in, which is where you're doing largely manual testing, either scripted or exploratory testing, and you really want to take on more test automation, or you're aiming to get into a role that is a test automation predominantly based role. So this is for you really. So there are a few common questions that seem to come up when I've been sort of researching this talk and listening to recruiters and other people. There seems to be a definite hunger for people to know, as a tester, why should I move into automation? What's the kind of what's in it? You know, what's the justification of doing that? And if I do want to do that, how? What's the best way of doing that? Maybe you're a hiring manager and someone that's growing an automation team, that's your job, and you really want to know different strategies or the best way to introduce or grow your automation capacity. Or you might want to know, you might be doing a bit of automation and you're thinking, I don't know if this is proper automation. That makes sense. I think it's very easy with the plethora of tools and different types of automation on the market to get a bit overwhelmed by things. So I wanted to touch on what good automation might look like, because I think this is something that people are interested in. So I kind of believe in the power of stories and storytelling. I think it's a good way, it's the best way that as humans we learn, we take on, we actually take on information. So there are a few stories that I kind of want to tell today. A bit of a why, what and how. So I want to go into some detail about why so many people are choosing automation and actually look at some statistics to back that up. In terms of the what, I want to look at a survey that I did the back end of last year, where I asked 40 major companies in the UK, or people that worked for those companies, how they did automation and offer some advice that you guys could hopefully take advantage of and be inspired by. So I'm going to delve into the detail of that. I also want to look at the what not. So some mistakes that I may have made, definitely have made, and myths, things that I wish someone would have told me right at the start of my journey that might have helped give me a bit more confidence along the way. I also want to look at the how you go about growing your automation skills, some tips and tricks, some things that have worked for me. And there's a cool infograph, because I'm super cool like that, that I will share with you guys with a lot of detailed information on places you might want to go to kind of make a start, and free services you can take advantage of. It's worth mentioning that David is going to be is available to answer any questions that you might have. He is an amazingly technically gifted and experienced automation engineer. And if there's any specifics you were kind of worried, wanted to answer, just pop a question in the chat thing throughout the talk. So it's a bit of a 2-for-1 really. You're getting my presentation and David's advice. So please take advantage of it. So I want to have a quick look at the why. So there's a really, really good website that I use a lot for researching what skills I might want to grow. And it's called IT Jobs Watch. I can send a link of where this is, but this information, I took this last night, so this is up to date. And you can see really it paints a really clear picture for why people are so interested to get into automation. The test engineer role, you can kind of use the IT Jobs Watch site. It polls a lot of different jobs boards and things, and comes up with market trends based on various search terms. And if you were to search for test engineer, you would find that there's 83 live vacancies throughout the whole of the UK. Obviously, we all know vacancies and jobs have taken a big hit with the advent of the coronavirus outbreak, but things are starting to pick up a little. There's also a rank that this website gives you compared to this time last year, how popular it was and how popular it is now. And we can see that test engineers is just going down in the ranks slightly. By way of comparison, test analyst as a search term had 29 vacancies. QA tester had 8. Exploratory testing, which I know a lot of people are into, that only has 10 live vacancies, and manual tester had just 4. So compare that to test automation, and obviously a chunk of that will be developer vacancies for people with tons of experience and a CS degree or background. But it is marked the difference, 461 live roles. And since I checked that, even just 2 days ago, that's gone up by 20, 30 positions. So that's one reason why it's pretty self-evident why automation is a growth industry. We can see in the top right-hand corner there, the job vacancy trend. So as a proportion of all IT jobs advertised, jobs that cite test automation as a skill is growing and growing and growing and growing, and it's kind of plateaued at about 6.5%. But it's still, I think it was 0.14 for manual testing. The key skills that are in demand are probably ones that some of the testers that are listening to this maybe already have, things like QA, agile software development. Selenium is a key tool. Java and C# skills are worth investing in, because they're the ones that are in these job adverts that people look for. And also the salary trend. You know, no one comes to work for free. People are passionate about testing, and I am one of those people, but it's not a bad thing that you need to work to pay the bills, and you want to secure the best salary that you can. You know, there's no shame in that. So it goes without saying that the average UK salary for test automation being 57,000 versus I think about 35,000 this had for QA tester salary. So it's definitely an easy sell for why you might want to get into automation. So I'm going to have a look at the automation survey that I did back in November. So this was a SurveyMonkey survey, free survey. And I also physically went to a Leeds Digital Jobs Fair and asked a number of companies the same question face to face. Obviously, this isn't the company's official position. These are just people that have filled in this survey saying that they worked for these companies. But I don't feel that they would have any reason to lie. So the things I wanted to know were, do all companies really do automation testing, or is that just a bit of a myth? I really wanted to understand how companies' automation teams are structured, because I think if you are someone who wants to break into automation, that's something that's really important. And actually the results confirmed something really, really important to me. What types of automation are they doing? And then I wanted to know what impresses these guys, the guys that are hiring people, when they're interviewing. What advice would they give to aspiring automation testers? So these are people for companies that you may want to work for. You know, you will probably recognize a lot of these companies. They are kind of international companies or with a strong foothold in the UK media and government, and, you know, small and big. So when I asked, does your organisation currently use automation testing, it's no surprise really that 95% said yes. I think there's a great variance in the amount of automation, the types of automation testing they did, and the maturity of their automation. They weren't all fully fledged, all singing and dancing CI/CD companies, but they were doing some element of automation. The next slide's really, really important. So what I wanted to know was, how do they structure their automation teams? And I thought about the different models for doing this. And I was really interested to see that in total, well over 60% of the people responded had automation teams that were made up partly with manual testers or people that were perhaps inexperienced coders, people that were learning, getting involved in writing the tests, maintaining the framework, particularly when a specialist automation tester had led that effort initially, so put the building blocks in place. And that's something really that a lot of teams are doing. So if you are trying to grow your automation facility, this is something you might want to take a look at. And I also think there's hope there for people that think, oh, I'll never be an automation tester. They're all super, super techy, and I'll never be able to conquer that. Most of the roles are not the specialist test automation person. They are the people that are trying to learn. So when I thought about this a bit more, I tried to think of an analogy, and the best analogy I could come up with was that of a Sherpa. So Sherpas are Nepalese people who help climbers to climb Mount Everest, and they are paid lots of money. Well, they're not paid lots of money, but in this analogy they are, to do things such as prepare the route for foreign climbers to follow. They fix those ropes in place and they carry the necessary climbing kit up the mountain. So the equivalent of that would be hiring a super experienced contract SDET or automation specialist to come up with the structure for your framework end to end, and use that experience to grow the team, the rest of the team. So whilst we were at Smoothwall, David was that person, and he helped train, I think, maybe 8 testers who had really limited automation skills, and they're all now doing automation every day. So, you know, that is a real value add, and it is a model that really works well, and it would certainly be the one that I would look for at other companies and advocate. I also asked what type of automation does your team get involved with, because I think sometimes as automation testers we can feel like we need to know absolutely everything, and we are actually, the truth is that we're always learning new things. There's always another tool to conquer or a different language that you might want to try. So most of the respondents were doing functional or regression automation. Lots were doing API automation, and a growing number were doing automation as part of the CI/CD pipeline. So just some information there that you might find useful for areas that you might want to grow your skill set, because these are what big companies are actually focusing their automation efforts on. So the next slide, I wanted to ask them what impresses you when you interview automation testers. And I found the responses quite interesting, because lots of them weren't all about what you would necessarily think. So you must be the best coder that anyone's ever seen. You must be able to code better than a developer, or, you know, that kind of viewpoint wasn't necessarily reflected as much. So when I look at the themes and try and think about what people were telling me, they were saying really what impresses them is knowledge of testing best practices, not necessarily coding or tooling. It's knowing how to be a good tester and really having that testing craft honed. And also the soft skills, they're so underestimated, and actually being visible and adding value and being good to work with is probably the best skill that you can have. Understanding code is important. I can't lie and say you don't need to understand code and there's a really easy route to do it. And, you know, there are low code options there, but really you're going to need to prepare yourself to put some effort into understanding coding. And also having good problem solving skills were really important. In terms of advice to give inexperienced testers, some of these I found really good. So if you are perhaps preparing for an interview, think about things like, oh, I've got a delivery person coming up my drive. Think about things like being able to demo any automation that you've had a go at. Try something yourself and get a GitHub repository. Have something there to show at interview. It's super impressive. Focus on your quality. Don't lie about your experience. Be honest. People love people that want to learn and have a passion to improve. Don't hide that. I think the single most important quote that I had was quite specific, and it said, pick a program language and stick with it. Do some automation practice projects. Do random projects in that programming language just for fun. Get to an intermediate level with the language. Their advice was knowing one language reasonably well will let you transfer those skills to other languages that companies may be interested in. And I like this quote, half of the struggle with programming is knowing what to Google. And in my experience, that is definitely true. Okay, so that was the survey. I will send out the link to the survey if you wanted to delve into some more of these responses, because there's tons of good information in there. I want to talk about mistakes that I maybe made and some things I wish I knew at the outset of my automation journey, all those many, many moons ago. And I'm going to use your friend of mine, Mr. Donald Trump, to help me with this. There's definitely a myth, I think, in the software industry that only developers can do automation testing. And whilst there are definitely some super technical elements of testing that developers can kind of advocate for you and assist you, really there's no element of testing that you can't learn. I myself am trying to learn NUnit testing at the moment. It's going all right. There are tons of free resources available I'm trying to take advantage of. So don't believe it's something that just developers do. Automation testers don't need to do manual testing. I think although there's a move to kind of, I guess, shift right practices or being fully continuous delivery focused, where you are pushing stuff into live before you've had a chance to test it, I still really think the strong preference in the industry is to understand the business logic of what you are trying to test, and particularly with exploratory testing, that gives you way more value than automation testing can. So your automation might check a particular thing, but it can't test everything like a human can. So it puts you at a disadvantage if you only want to do automation as a job, because I think being a generalist tester, you have more opportunities available to you, and you're more likely to be asked to stick around if you understand the business logic and you can add value in that way too. This is something that I hear a lot. People will say, I'd love to get into automation, but my boss doesn't see the value in it, and I'm kind of languishing in this manual testing role, and I don't know what to do. It's just, you might not be able to, I think it's easier to ask forgiveness than wait for permission. And sometimes you have to use a bit of your own time, invest in yourself and your skills to push the agenda a little bit with automation. And ultimately, if your company is never going to change, maybe think about your future elsewhere. But there's so much you can do on your own proactively that we'll go into a bit later. But it's just, if you're waiting for your boss to give you a chance, don't. It's also a mistake to think that you have to know everything. And this is certainly something that I've been guilty of, just being completely overwhelmed by suddenly reading a blog post or an article or hearing someone, and just being so overwhelmed by that, thinking, oh, I'm never going to be that person, so I'll just forget about automation. And really, I've got a couple of quotes here from talks that I've been to in the past. Peter Simons did a really good talk. He used to be, he learned how to do automation whilst he was at Sage. And he really said, you've got nothing to be afraid of. It isn't this all scary thing. It's something that you can learn piecemeal and really make effective change quite quickly. Also a guy called Steve Meller, who's currently, I think, head of testing at the All Stars Group.
Stars Group, yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah, so test manager at Stars Group.
Right. Yeah, he's awesome. And he once said to me, well, does it run the manual steps? Does it do what it's supposed to do? Then it works. Then it's kosher. It's good enough. So don't feel like your automation framework has to be all things to all people, because that's kind of a mistake to think that. So some tips and tricks, things that I have done, kind of whiz through some of these. So, you know, don't be afraid to take courses and exams, online courses. There's so many of them. Test Automation University was launched last year and they are fantastic. They offer so many free courses, it's unreal. And often you get a code repository with that you can kind of plug and play. So I've got a bunch of end unit tests now that I can refer to as kind of a library of knowledge when I'm trying to implement that myself, sort of commercially. So definitely think about that. Practice, you know, you have to put the effort in, but you will get there. Something that I did a while ago was asking my network for help. Obviously, face-to-face is kind of a struggle at the moment, but there's certainly nothing stopping you from scheduling a Zoom meeting or reaching out to the tons of people that are in the testing community that will give you their help for free. I'm Northern, so if anything's free, then I'm kind of down with it. And you know, in this instance, I was able to get, again, it was Steve Meller who was able to give me his time over a coffee. It cost me £3, and he was able to just take a look over the automation framework I've written and give me some really great pointers to improve it. So don't be afraid to reach out to people to get that sort of validation. Go to online meetups, go to conferences, do code camps. I've done all these things and they've helped immeasurably, both to help with the skills, but also to have that network and realize that everyone is in the same position that you're in. You know, everyone is trying to learn and grow and do their best. And there is some fantastic support out there and people that really want to help you. So take advantage of that. And now, so more than ever, there are so many online meetups and you can go to them from all over the place, you know, so definitely try that. Again, back to the mistake of waiting for your boss to give you approval to do some automation. I have been that person that has gone away in my own spare time and had a go at developing something. Most recently, you know, project demands and time limitations and all that stuff meant I couldn't invest the time into CI that I wanted to. So I just did it over the weekend and I managed to get some API tests and some unit tests, which I hadn't written, and some WebDriver UI tests running through my pipeline. Now that's kind of, there's some more work there to do, but it's half the battle. And then you're able to take something tangible, you know, something, maybe do automate an actual test of the website that your company works on, and take that to the powers that be and say, look, this is what we can do. I've been able to get this off the ground. And that's way more powerful than just trying to persuade someone with no evidence that they should invest a lot of money and time into growing your team's automation skills. Again, if you're not getting the opportunities, maybe right now with the kind of recession and things not being so great, I wouldn't be quite as confident with this piece of advice, but it's certainly something that should ultimately be prepared to do, because there are companies out there that if you are not encouraging your staff to grow this group of skills and they're interested in doing that, they will ultimately go elsewhere, because that is how the industry is moving. So I certainly noticed a huge shift in my learning when I went to work in an environment that had that Sherpa, you know, that had that experienced person that could help. Know what good automation looks like. So this is kind of a yin and yang, I guess. So have a think about what you want to get out of your automation framework. You know, from the start, have a strategy for how you are going to get to where you need to be. And that might be that in stages. So first you build an automation framework that runs locally, and then you might integrate that into the shared code base, and then you might implement that into the CI framework, and then you might add a different flavor of testing. So good automation to me, and David gave me these tips too, needs to be robust, maintainable. Ideally, it needs to give you some good feedback and reporting, so you can really debug quite easily. The tests need to set themselves up and tear themselves down, and generate their own test data if they need to. It needs to have well-structured code, you know, follow the same sort of principles that developers do, don't repeat yourself, and all that stuff. It needs to be well commented, and such that an inexperienced person could really easily break it down and understand what's going on. And you know, if you want something to work across platforms or browsers or environments, think about that from the start if you can. You don't have to implement it from day one, but it's great to know where you want to get to. Alan Richardson, who is the evil tester, he's a really cool person to follow. And I asked him if I could put this slide in, because I thought it was really a really good point. That if you want to automate, start tactical, small and simple. Don't feel like you have to do everything initially, because you will probably hit resistance and you will probably fail because the wider system won't commit the resources you need to succeed. So don't be afraid to start small and build on that. So I put together an infographic here. Can you guys see this? I moved on to a different tab. Can you guys see that? Yeah.
Yeah, that's fine.
Cool. So again, I'll share this in the chat, or Sam can maybe share this link with you guys afterwards. But it really gives some options for some of the strategies you might want to consider. So some good things to do is persuade your boss of the value of automation, or persuade your team, or find a advocate developer or a senior person that can really push the agenda for you to promote automation, and create a proof of concept for your project, or a repetitive task that the whole team just hates doing and it's a super manual, boring thing. If you can automate that, that's a win. It doesn't need to be test related. You know, that's a really great thing that you can do to grow your skills. You might consider retraining, especially now if you're someone that happens to be furloughed. There are tons of graduate trainee programs, and there's coding boot camps. I know North Coders are doing like a 14-week boot camp. They seem to be more focused on kind of web development stuff, but it's still learning a lot of great technical skills. So that might be worth thinking about. You know, don't be afraid to attend meetings and reach out to people, do some online courses. If you're going to an interview, perhaps the biggest advice that I can give you is ask to see the framework that you will be using, and meet the people that you'll be working with, and really try and get to see if it's something that is the right fit for you, something where you get the right amount of training to grow those skills. And if you're contracting and you're not getting the opportunities, maybe think about reducing your rate. I know that's probably not what any contractor wants to hear, but it's certainly something that I did. So in terms of tooling, you might want to start simple. So some of the tools that I've thought about here, Catalan Studio, Selenium IDE, or Selenium 4 that's coming out soon, or is already out, I think. Testing.io is a cool one to try. It's kind of a low code automation thing. They do a free trial, so that's worth having a look at. Try Postman. All of these tools are free to take a look at. Soap UI, Playwright, Puppeteer. Again, don't think you need to know all of these things. This is just an indication of things you might want to look at. There's also a growth in robotic process automation for, perhaps for test data creation or regression testing. That's a really cool thing to look at, and there's a lot of coding concepts in there. Find a Sherpa, do it. If you're trying to grow this team, find someone that knows that training and coaching is pivotal to their role. Don't hire someone that's going to sit on their own with their headphones on and not integrate with anybody, because then they are the only person with that knowledge and it will be to the detriment of your whole team. Decide what you want from automation and invest in a framework that is maintainable, scalable, robust, and easy to teach. Right, I know I'm kind of up again. Right, that's it.
Perfect.
I was thinking there aren't
Cheers.
too many more slides, are there? So yeah, so hopefully, I really hope that has helped people that were listening really think about their next steps and, invest in yourself and believe in yourself. And, there is a real opportunity to be a part of growing automation. And it would be really great to hear some success stories from you guys. That would be cool.
Cheers for that, Beth.
No worries.
Really, really, really good presentation. I definitely get a lot from it. I think, so obviously now's the time for any questions. I think Rupi Thandi has got a question, so feel free to chip in as well, David. So which tools did you use for API automation?
There's obviously quite a plethora of tools available out there to do what you want. Some of the tools that are pretty popular for API automation are JMeter, of course. That'll let you set up a whole sort of test case to do all the sort of things that you'd like to do in order to test an API and then run certain sets of data through it. JMeter is probably one of the most popular ones out there. Then there's other sort of very similar pieces of software like, is it Load Runner, I think, which does something very similar. And I think also Postman, which was originally designed to do sort of manual API testing, has also extended its capabilities to allow you to run those tests often in an automated sequence. And you can possibly even take your Postman sequences and include them as part of a CI/CD pipeline. The other good thing about Postman, I'd say, is that if you write a manual API test case using that, you can export it into one of different sort of flavors of code, so that you can actually use that as part of a different framework. You can also get some great snippets out of it doing that too. Is there a risk that automation jobs will move to be part of the dev team?
Well, interesting. If you don't mind me answering, David.
Yeah.
Because, so at the end of the month, I am doing another talk where I have asked 100 software testers of their experiences under coronavirus. And I've been really, the responses are really interesting. And in terms of that, testers losing out to developers who are increasingly, taking on testing roles in order to save money, for the company to save money. There definitely were a couple of responses to that effect. There were responses along the lines of testers are an easy target for redundancy. There were also a lot of the responses that say there's an opportunity for growth here. My working conditions have improved as a tester. Things are looking good. There's greater opportunities for companies to take on testers. There's more opportunities in digital kind of more companies want to go digital as a result of coronavirus, so there's opportunities there. But it's a real tale of two cities, and I think there's definitely a risk that the less skilled you are in the technical side of testing, the more at risk you're likely to be as the market turns and companies are forced into redundancies. I do think that, yeah.
Yes. So there's 47 people in the chat. You've all got a reactions button. Just stick your thumb up if you haven't yet had a chance to get into automation, but obviously you're interested to do so. So you haven't yet had a chance to get into it. Just interested. And then I wonder if it'll actually show us.
Yeah, it might be worth getting off the share screen just so we can see the gallery.
Okay, I can do that.
Yeah. There's a couple on there, yeah.
Okay. So there's obviously quite a lot of people who have been able to at least break into automation a little bit, which is good. And you know, you're probably finding there's such a huge world out there. Obviously, if you are able to find somebody within the company who can help you out, or the company's hired a Sherpa, as Beth has said, that person can lead you down a certain pathway with a certain slightly smaller scope of tools to work with. But if you don't have that and it's kind of a free reign, you know, where on earth do you start? So Beth's put some really fantastic points on this presentation about some of the leading tools to use. And the other tip I would add to things is when you're learning for yourself or you're going online to try and find the answer to how to actually achieve something, and you're using Google, of course, sort by date in terms of your matches that you get, that you find, because there's so much information out there and some of it can be quite old and stuff changes really fast. So if you're following a tutorial, don't follow a tutorial ideally that's 3 years old. Try and get it within the last year, because you can sort of spend some needless time, unfortunately, going down some rabbit holes, and you get to a point you think, hey, this isn't working, but it worked in the tutorial. Oh, things have moved on since that point. Then you've got to contact the person who wrote it and stuff like that. So when you search on Google for an answer for whatever your problem is, there's a little bit, I think it says advanced search options. You click that and you can say, give me results that are only within 12 months. And every time I was helping people out with their team, with their problems within their little team, it was always a case of let's find something that's up to date and relevant, because things really move on fast with everything, as you probably know. Does anybody else want to talk up or ask some questions on chat? And perhaps
I was going to say, I think so. Whilst people are doing that, I speak to a lot of testers who, because I think you've sort of mentioned it, there's a lot of information out there and everything does move so quickly in terms of tool and languages to use and everything. What would you suggest for people trying to sort of break into it in terms of what tools to use? Because I've had a couple of instances where people have tried to get used to a tool or some sort of language, and then by the time they get to really understand it, it's kind of out of date just because everyone's moved on to the next thing. What would you suggest with that?
Yes. First up, I would look and see what is the programming language of choice used by the developers in the company. So if the developers are writing in C#, try and write a framework in C#, and then the developers will be very happy to help you with it, and also it'll integrate very easily in what they're building as well. So C# and Java are kind of the two most prominent languages that test automation is written in. That's more sort of the heavyweight approach to things. You could do something on a much more lighter weight approach, which Beth mentioned in terms of browser plugins, etc., which will let you create some lightweight automated solutions very easily. I think probably in its starting point with Selenium, they produced a little browser plugin, and that allowed you to click through links in a page and it would record the sequence, and that was a really fast way to produce that. And there are plugins available to let you do that, like Catalan, that Beth mentioned earlier. And a lot of those plugins are still particularly useful and more versatile than they used to be, because they will let you export it into another programming language of your choice so that you can incorporate it into a framework with C# or Java, for example. So yeah, definitely find out what your developers are using. They'll probably be using C# or they'll probably be using Java. They might be using something like Perl. I probably wouldn't experiment too much with Perl for automation. I'd probably stick with one of the main languages out there, so that you know that your skills are really versatile and you'll be able to easily switch to something else. SpecFlow is great, obviously, for BDD. That's been around for quite a while. That allows you to obviously phrase your programming sequences in a certain way using your human readable natural language to describe the behavior. Still do need to know some coding underneath that to obviously define what each of those things are going to do programmatically. But yes, has anybody found that for example, they've got a task, they're working in a company, there's a lot of emphasis on manual stuff, but not on automation, but there's a particular task they're doing which is really repetitive, and they would love to be able to automate it. And maybe it's not, for example, just automating the UI of a website. Maybe it's something else. Has anyone found that? And perhaps we could think of a solution that you could use to fulfill that and get that manual repetition instrumented in terms of code. If you do, speak up. Or if anyone else wants to share a little breakthrough that they've had in terms of they've been at a company and they've managed to had a chat with the boss or the tech lead and say, look, I've been able to see a case for us using automation, and you put it to that person and they've said, okay, demo it to us, show us the value in it, and then we'll put you a lot more focused on doing automation instead.
Chris.
I was just going to say, I'm not a tester. I'm actually a developer. So throw things at me if you want. I just absolutely agree with David. I think you'll find most development teams would embrace you if you said, I want to automate some of this testing. And if you said, what language are you using? What would you suggest? And you start working together. It's a brilliant way to build, to forge better bonds between a development and test team to start working like that. So double thumbs up for that, David. A brilliant suggestion.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great way to get collaborative with people. And the developers will really be able to help you in terms of get over any little snags that you're encountering, because they're probably fairly straightforward for the developers to help you sort out. And that's the other thing I would say is one of the mistakes I probably made in the early days was trying to take on too much myself. I know what I wanted to achieve in an aspect of what I wanted the framework to do, but it was taking a long time to kind of get there and understand the best way to do it. So go to your developers and say, this is what I want it to be able to do, and take that little thing that you're trying to get it to do in isolation and get that to work. The developers will be able to help you really easily get over that snag, and they'll also be able to tell you a really efficient way to go about it. Because there's not always one approach to get something working. There's so many different ways you can achieve the same thing. Fundamentally, the most important thing is that you can actually get the framework to give you the results on whether something is behaving as expected or not. Whether you do that in the most eloquent way in terms of code, or whether you do it in a really rough, rudimentary way, the most important thing is that you get that answer, you get the confidence in the software that's been built. And then when you get the extra time, you can refine that code and make it as efficient and as eloquent as you have the time to do. But you obviously want to make sure that your framework is robust. I always used to say to people, when you've written a test case, run it a number of times, maybe even run it 5 times, because you might find that even if you've written something and it passes the first time, the third and the fourth time it fails. So make sure your stuff is robust, because once you get that into a pipeline and it's running every time there's a new build, you don't want your tests to come back as being too flaky, because then people lose a bit of confidence in the framework that you've built or the test cases that you've written. So run it a bunch of times, make sure it's rock solid, and then you know the results that come back from it are really dependable.
Awesome. I think there's another question from Mike. And it's essentially on your thoughts of Cypress as a UI automation tool. Is that something that either of you have?
I've never used Cypress. I've heard it's good, but I've never dabbled in it myself.
I must admit, I haven't touched Cypress either. but if it's popular and it's out there and a lot of people are talking about it, then as Beth said earlier, take that as your main focus.
Yeah.
Go as far with it as you have time to do, and then you'll find what you've learned through that is very transferable into other tools. That at the end of the day, they all do something somewhat similar.
They really do. Yeah,
they do exactly.
I've definitely found that with, for example, API automation.
Yeah.
You know, I was thinking, oh, I've never used SOAP UI before. How different is that to Postman? Well, it's not really, because you're just interrogating the APIs and you're asking the same question of the tool and it's giving you the same reply back. So I think it's more, not necessarily the tooling is the most important thing. It's getting experience in the different types of automation. So what makes you stand out is if you've been able to automate not only UI testing, but you might have learned something about security testing, or you might be able to do something on API testing and unit testing, or, you know, you have those, you've climbed up those different mountains a little bit to a greater or lesser extent. And also, I definitely agree with the point about aligning yourself to the coding, the code that your developers use. And that goes for, you know, when you're applying for roles as well. Look at the jobs to see the code and the frameworks that are already in use, because chances are when you're joining an automation, you're not going to change that. So you are going to want to adapt your skills to work with that. But the more I learn, the more I see it's repeatable. The practices that you learn are completely transferable. So there are tools that might have one or two things that the other ones don't, but really it's about the thing that they're trying to automate and the area of the stack that they're trying to cover. And if you can get to grips with a tool in each of those main areas, then you're pretty golden.
Yep, I would totally agree with that. Question from Jayesh about qualifications for QA. When you've got experience, practical real world experience, but no qualification. So I think as an absolute minimum, companies do like to see that people have got the foundation in ISTQB. However, and it's not too difficult to get that one. So I'd say as a minimum, everyone should aim for that one. You can go off in all kind of directions with the theory side of things, and that is always very useful. I would say if you're not somebody so inclined for tests and exams, etc., then don't worry too much. That's not for everyone. And as long as you get some really good practical experience in companies and also outside on your own, and you can demonstrate that you've been able to put stuff together, that practical experience will take you very far. So to Jayesh, I'd say try and aim for a minimum of the foundation ISTQB, but then don't worry too much past that point. To put things into perspective, I'm working on some pretty complex automation projects at the moment with some large teams. In fact, I've been doing some work with Microsoft, who came into Ordnance Survey, and through all of my years that I've been doing manual and automated testing, mostly automated testing, I've only ever done the ISTQB foundation. That was it. I don't like exams, actually. Beth is the opposite to me. She loves them. She thrives on them. I can't stand them. I can't stand them.
See, I just need that for me. I just need that external sort of validation that, okay, you know this thing. But I certainly find with some of the test automation stuff and perhaps the ISTQB stuff, there's not that much takeaway that you can apply in your actual work. So
yeah, so the practical counts for a
theory.
lot.
Yeah, but there's no substitute for just get a GitHub repository. They're free. Start to look for code that other people have done for online courses maybe, and just play around with it. Just practice. You know, get your hands dirty is a way better way to learn than trying to do it from the theory. So I've tried to learn Java, and I've taken the Java Oracle, I don't know, whatever it is, the developers exam twice, and I failed twice because at the time I wasn't using Java. I wasn't actually using it in anger. So when I was looking at code, it was just like another language to me. You know, it's really hard to abstractly understand what that means. Whereas when you're learning it every day and you're using it, you get to grips with it a lot faster. So I think learning by doing rather than insisting on certifications and stuff is the way forward. I definitely think there's a although the jobs are kind of thin on the ground right now, there's certainly opportunities there for automation testers, and what people really want is people that can do the job, not people that can think about how to do the job. So I think exams and certifications, they help give an indication that you are interested in something and you want to progress your career in that direction, but they're no substitute really for doing
I answered a question about Fahmid. Not all applications that you might want to be testing are through a website and UI based, or rather, you may have an application that you need to test which is not on a website, not web based. It might be a desktop application, or it might be an application that runs on iOS or Android. Appium is a good popular extension of WebDriver, and it will let you interact with desktop applications on Windows. So you can go ahead and locate things and click buttons, etc. There are XPaths that you can define just like you can against a website, but against buttons on a Windows app or an iOS app. And also there is, what's the one that we used, Beth, at Smoothwall to do a bit of clicking and pointing on things done by the visual layout of the screen?
Securely?
That's the one, Securely. Securely is another interesting automation tool. That one really lets you do quite a bit of targeted automation without knowing any code at all, really. And you can do some extremely flexible things with it. As long as you can bring up the application on your screen, you can essentially click around on different buttons within your application, and it'll record what you're looking at. In terms of, it'll take a snapshot of what the submit button looks like, of what a form field looks like, and then it'll write a sequence that you can then fill out with a few details, and it'll allow you to pretty much automate anything. There's some disadvantages in that you can only run one test at a time. You couldn't run them in parallel. You have to have your hands off of the computer at the time the test is running, but it basically mimics you as a human clicking around and typing stuff into the computer. It'll allow you to get automation done very fast with a limited amount of code, and is very flexible in terms of letting you automate anything that you want. I mean, you could bring up a virtual window through to a Chromebook, I think we tried to do at one point, and you could automate stuff on a Chromebook or some operating system where it's difficult to sort of hook into. And another thing I would say is that if you have to automate some third-party tools in order to automate testing of your own company's software, see if that third party has a command line access, and try and pull the strings on those components through command line access. So doing stuff with VirtualBox, for example, has a command line. I think we interacted with all kinds of things, didn't we? What was it? Google
definitely
Directory?
Bash and shell scripting is useful, definitely.
Yeah, a lot of software that's been created out there and platforms have a command line. So that means if you need to automate parts of it, look at their documentation and you'll find some way, often via a REST API, that you'll be able to interact with it. There is, Fahmid, it is possible to, depending on how the Windows application has been built, it is possible to use some programs to inspect aspects of it to try and derive an XPath to target a particular part of that application. The developer who was on the line earlier, he might be able to explain a bit more about that, but I think there's a certain way that Windows developers have to code their application so that you can then hook into it in a programmatic way. Although I think we're running out of time.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, yeah, I think there's a few other questions that we we probably don't have time for. But what we'll do is we'll send all the unanswered ones over to you guys, so we can fire them across after this. But yeah, no, thank you very much, Beth and David. I really enjoyed that. I hope everyone else got something to take away from that as well. But yeah, we've got a bunch of other things coming up in terms of events, so feel free to check out our website and obviously hop on them if interested. But yeah, if there's no more questions, we'll leave it there, and yeah, just say thank you again, guys.
Yeah, and if anyone
Thank
missed
you
out a
everyone for your
question,
time
send it
today.
on LinkedIn.
Awesome. Well, yeah, cheers for that, guys.
Thanks, guys.
Okay.
Bye bye.
See you later. Bye.
Bye bye.